Welcome back, everyone. And next up, I'm pleased to say we have Marc Paradis, who's Vice President of Data Strategy at Northwell Health. It's his responsibility to enrich Northwell Health's data assets in order to empower patients, augment providers, support families, and raise the health of all the communities that Northwell serves. For 25 years, Marc has been implementing models that drive action, providing measurable value to all stakeholders. While leading Optum's Data Science University, he taught his unique approach to product-centric data science, machine learning, and AI to more than 2,200 individuals. He has a master's in cellular and molecular neurobiology from MIT and a bachelor's in chemistry from Cornell University too. Now today, Marc is going to share his insights on how AI commercialization fails and a better model to bring mission-driven AI to market. So welcome, Marc.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott, and welcome everyone to the talk. You did a wonderful job covering my bio there. So I won't spend any more time introducing me, but most of you probably aren't familiar with Northwell Health, and so I'd like to take a moment to introduce who Northwell Health is. We are an integrated healthcare delivery system of more than 32,000 mission-driven clinicians and over 74,000 selfless employees supporting that mission. Our mission is to raise health not only for the 11 million people and their communities in our service area, but in so doing to raise health for everyone. We are 23 hospitals and more than 830 outpatient centers covering the entirety of the U.S. healthcare spectrum, from tertiary care hospitals to specialty hospitals to community hospitals to clinics, practices, and ambulatory services of all kinds. Our hospitals and outpatient centers span all 5 boroughs of New York City, the length and breadth of Long Island, and all of Westchester County. We are a unique system for many reasons, but I really want to draw attention to what makes our data assets unique. Our service area of 11 million plus lives is probably the most ethnically, sociodemographically, culturally, and economically diverse population in the US, if not the world. And our scale is really enormous. We treat more than 2 million distinct patients annually with over 5.5 million patient encounters. We treat more than 19,000 New Yorkers every year for cancer. We do more than 2.5 million radiological studies every year. 1% of all births in the US actually occur in a Northwell hospital or facility, and the list goes on. And of course, like so many New York health systems, we were and still are on the front lines of COVID with detailed longitudinal clinical data on more than 70,000 first wave COVID patients, more than 17,000 of whom we treated as inpatients. I could go on, but I think you're beginning to understand some of what makes our data assets unique. So why does data matter in a talk about AI? Data is the raw material of AI. There is no AI without high quality data. Fair and unbiased AI requires broadly representative data. Accurate and durable AI must be implemented and validated in real world settings against real world data collected from real clinical workflows. And finally, commercializable AI must deliver quantifiable value based on measurable outcomes. So I'd like to take a moment to level set, because there's a lot of confusion around what is AI and what isn't AI. And I'll sort of jump to the punchline on this one. And that's that AI is really a moving goalpost. It's whatever computers can't quite yet do today or can't quite do well today. But to give a little bit of context to it, AI was first defined at the Dartmouth Conference in 1956. And it is the top domain under which statistical learning falls, and then machine learning is a subset of statistical learning, then deep learning and reinforcement learning as subsets of machine learning, and then finally transfer learning and few-shot learning as subsets of machine learning as well. People always want to know where data science and big data fall in this, and both of those exist outside of and intersected with these domains. So data science is not AI, big data is not AI, but all of these parts and pieces do interact. And you do need all of them to really make AI work. So in case you weren't aware, AI in healthcare is a wicked problem. Wicked is actually a technical term, and it represents a particularly difficult class of problems that can be characterized by these 10 features. These are slippery, multidimensional, cross-disciplinary, vague, system-oriented problems that fall deeply into the gray areas of human judgment. And just to kind of give a couple of examples that we've been working on at Northwell of AI problems in healthcare that would qualify as wicked, taking a look at this chest x-ray, right? Does this patient have pneumonia, and is it COVID? And can we turn that into a predictive algorithm? Can we build AIs to determine that? Taking a look at these series of vitals for a given patient, can we determine whether or not this patient is stable for the evening and whether or not they need to be woken up? Can we allow them to sleep through the night to get a full night's rest to help in their recovery and return to normal life? When should we begin goals of care conversations? At what point in time in a patient's predicted decompensation pathway should we begin to have those types of conversations? Nonetheless, despite being a wicked problem, AI in healthcare is saving lives today. It's doing it in radiology, detecting pulmonary embolisms that otherwise go unnoticed. It's detecting strokes that, again, would otherwise go unnoticed on various scans. It's saving lives in oncology, not only in the space of detecting and diagnosing breast cancer, but many other types of lesions, in cardiovascular risk segmentation, in intensivist and hospitalist care, and many, many others, right? So the thing that I sort of want you to remember from that, because it's going to become important later on in the talk, is AI in healthcare saves lives. But AI isn't magical. You don't simply sprinkle the pixie dust of AI onto the hardest problems and suddenly transform them from wicked problems into easy ones. Doing AI right is actually really hard. Building models that work on test data but fail in production is really, really easy. And in fact, the dirty little secret of AI is, if you give me 1 hour with your data, I'll give you 300 models, and I guarantee I can get at least $1 million in funding for 10 of those models. For this reason, it's really easy to make cool AI demos, but it is hard to make productizable AI models. A good AI model needs to be reliable, generalizable, unbiased, equitable, explainable, impactful, scalable, adaptable, just to name a few. The good news is that we know how to actually assess and remediate and deliver all of these in order to build well-engineered, productizable AI models that are commercializable to broad markets. But doing so is in fact an engineering problem, albeit an engineering problem that does require a lot of highly skilled people putting in a lot of intense effort, supported by state-of-the-art technology and infrastructure, all of which requires a lot of capital. So how do we raise capital? Well, usually we start with companies, or we start companies with the help of friends and family and our fellow founders. Then we go out and we raise seed money, usually via angels or accelerators or some similar type of mechanism. Then we start hiring people. Then we raise more money, usually venture capital money, in a series of rounds. Then we build and sell and scale our AI product. And then we raise yet more money, usually in the form of an IPO backed by an investment bank. And then, if all goes well, at last, we change the world for the better with our well-engineered and productized AI. But the ugly truth of startups is that most don't survive. And in fact, only about 1 in 6 survive to a Series C. And of those, only about 1 in 6 get acquired. So your joint probability of getting to Series C and being acquired is roughly 1 in 36. Now, I know that statisticians in the audience can quibble over just to what extent these two events are independent and identically distributed random variables, but nonetheless, you're going to be in this range. Now, you might argue, well, being acquired is, of course, only one way to exit. So what about going IPO? Well, the data here aren't much better. Of those that survive to Series C, your chances of exiting via an IPO are only about 1 in 25. So your overall chances of any kind of exit, IPO or acquisition, are about 1 in 5. And of having survived to Series C, which is about 1 in 6, that gives you about a 1 in 30 chance of exiting by any format. Now, note, this isn't quite exactly the same as your cumulative chance of exiting by Series C, because some companies do exit as seed or as Series A or as Series B, but those are rare, and your odds are not great overall. Now, you may have noticed this drop here from seed to Series A, and then this kind of reversal from Series A to Series B. And what this really suggests and highlights in a data-driven form is that going from seed to Series A is actually remarkably difficult, right? That jump from those angel investors, right, to that first round of venture capitalists is remarkably difficult. For those of you who are incredulous that the numbers on in this table don't quite add up with the charts on the previous slide, the table on this slide is the failure to raise the following round at each round, whereas the previous charts were both cumulative probabilities up to a given round. So slightly different measures, but same underlying data. Unfortunately, there isn't good data on how many companies achieve financial stability and stay private, or how many simply hit the end of their runway and go out of business. There's also some ugly truths about funding and VCs. So we have here a typical deal flow for a typical deal flow funnel for a typical VC. And one of the first things that leaps out at you is there's a 99% plus rejection rate. Even if you've got 100 to 200 VCs out there, there aren't 1,000 good startups for every one of those VCs, right? So the same VCs end up chasing the same promising deals, often with multiple VCs participating in a given round. And this, of course, is part of why you see so many outsized investments in what appear to be overvalued companies. It's also why VCs expect most of their investments to fail, and why they rely on a handful of successes to make their multiples. It's also why all of their investments are managed to tightly myopic entry and exit criteria as part of their thesis. And it's also why VCs really don't care about the long-term survival or impact of your company or your product or your vision or your mission. So long as they make their multiple before you flame out, it's all good to them. I haven't been able to find good statistics in sort of the angel seed space. It's a much harder space to track, but the same can be said to be roughly true of angel investors, although the failure rates are even higher, obviously, when you're working at that earliest stage of a company. So why do most startups not make it, right? It's a valid question. The staff at CB Insights did detailed postmortems on 111 such failures, and their analysis yielded the following top 12 reasons. Note that most startups gave more than one reason for their failure, which is why if you add up all of these percentages, these 12 percentages, you'll get a number much larger than 100. Looking at these, you can see that many of them are related to these funding chasms between investment stages that we were just talking about, these differences between the entry and the exit criteria, right? And these chasms create funding silos with, as we're saying, these whipsaw entry and exit requirements that differ dramatically between those silos. And that kind of whipsawing can lead to a loss of focus and poor execution on the part of your company, and on your true goal of getting your well-engineered productizable AI model out to the largest possible commercial market. Now, on our way to that large commercial market, we actually find another chasm. This is a chasm in tech adoption between early and mainstream market segments. And in fact, if you can't cross this chasm, if you can't grab enough of the market, then you can't generate enough growth by any metric to justify the next round of investment. So we have reasons that we can attribute to funding chasms, we have reasons that we can attribute to the market adoption chasm, and we also have reasons that we can attribute to a chasm in the product management lifecycle. Building a product is easy relative to building a product that people not only want to buy, but actually will buy. Those are three very, very different things. Building a product is not the same as building a product that people want to buy, is different from building a product that people actually will buy. And so you have to ask yourself questions, standard sorts of product management lifecycle questions. Are you solving a problem your customer cares about? Is your marketing effective? Is your price point too high or too low? Does your product differentiate from the rest of the market? Is your product defensible? How broad is your moat? And on and on and on. So we have reasons that we can attribute to funding chasms. We have reasons that we can attribute to the market adoption chasm. We have reasons that we can attribute to the product management lifecycle chasm. And they all seem to tangle and intertwine and align into a Gordian knot known as the traction gap. You can have the best product in the world, but if you can't get traction, you will be relegated to the margins of your market, and you will likely go out of business. This traction gap, it can't be escaped. It is a fundamental part of company and product life cycles, but it is made worse, much, much worse, by the siloed whipsaw funding models that we currently use, as you can see here, right? Remember how we talked about that gap between seed and VC and how that was an exceptionally difficult transition to make? In part, that's because that gap lines up right in the middle of all of these other chasms, right in the middle of when you're trying to cross that market adoption chasm, right in the middle of when you're trying to cross that product management chasm. And our models basically drop you right at that place. But remember, as I said earlier, AI in healthcare saves lives. You are trying to get your well-engineered AI model to a broad market as a commercial product because it saves lives. In fact, it's almost a moral imperative to get your AI model to the broadest market possible as quickly as possible. If your company fails to exit, or if it fails to secure the next round of funding, or if it fails to secure or goes out of business for any reason, people who could have lived will die. People's health and well-being are actually on the line here. We have to find a better way. We believe that we have solved this problem at Northwell, and that we've solved it by horizontalizing our investment strategy to align with our three uniquely differentiable and defensible assets, namely the scale of our data, the depth of our clinical expertise, and the breadth of our healthcare implementation platform. We begin by identifying internal gaps in care or operational inefficiencies or administrative needs that have real impact and cost associated with them. And we make sure those gaps or inefficiencies or needs generalize to other healthcare institutions, that they're not just Northwell problems, but they are general healthcare problems. We then spend a lot of time finding partners with AI-enabled technologies, products, and services that have the potential to solve those gaps or inefficiencies or needs. Or if no suitable partner exists, then we look to our own internal innovation capabilities to build out those technologies. We then invest our data, our expertise, and our healthcare implementation platform in return for equity, revenue share, joint IP, advisory positions, and so on. All the same things that would be part of a traditional capital investment. We use a repeatable, scalable, transparent, evidence-based pipeline that delivers well-engineered, productizable AI algorithms with broad market appeal that solve problems in healthcare that providers and patients actually care about. This streamlined pipeline, in effect, de-risks subsequent capital investments in the company by demonstrating in a methodologically rigorous and evidence-based way that the AI algorithms actually work as part of clinical workflows and that they deliver hard outcomes and measurable value in the real world. And we also make all of that information, how we calculated that, how we determined that is also publicly available. So as the company goes to market, its marketing is evidence-based, right? Is fact-driven, and we can stand behind it in an authentic way because we know that we implemented it here and it provided value here, and we know how we calculated that. Of course, there's still going to be failures. Not every AI algorithm survives the rigorous validation of the pipeline, and many companies still won't successfully clear those chasms that make up that traction gap. But your odds of succeeding will be dramatically improved by partnering with and by helping carry and by helping bridge across that chasm. So, in summary, because not everyone here is necessarily in healthcare, but I do believe that this model and approach can be generally applicable. So where do you begin? Find your mission. What is your ethical imperative? Virtually every company has some type of ethical imperative associated with their mission or their vision or where they're seeking to go in the world. Align your assets. Take a good hard look at what you can uniquely bring to bear in this context, what other people need that you have. And data is, quite frankly, one of the most valuable assets any company has. Operating data about your customers, data about your sales, data about your market, data about your customers, so on and so on. Find passionate partners. So what is your shared vision, right? Find partners who really align with you in a very deep and very visceral way, and with whom you feel you can really get into the trenches with them as you're going to put their technologies, their products, their services through their paces in real world environments. Mind the gap. Be very aware that these chasms exist. They are real chasms. They're well documented. And think about how you can horizontalize your investments. How do you take those assets that you've aligned to better support your partners and help them to go and bridge those gaps? And quite frankly, I didn't even go through all of the gaps and the chasms that exist. There are in fact more. And finally, and I think this is one of the most important pieces. And this is a little different for us because we're nonprofit, and obviously if you're for profit, the calculus here changes a little bit. But as a nonprofit, we are making margin to support our mission. And I would argue even as a for-profit, you should still look at it as making margin to support your mission. The goal here shouldn't be to maximize revenue at the expense of your partners, drive your investments by sort of irrational or narrow-minded or myopic entry and exit criteria. It should really all be about what is a fair margin in response to what you're putting in to help you change the world. So in short, sort of in closing, if you will, if I had to sort of encapsulate all of this in a single phrase, it's do well by doing good. So thank you for your time. I hope that was informative, and look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. It certainly was informative. I must apologise, by the way, if anybody heard me sneezing after about 7.5 minutes there. I realised that my microphone wasn't on mute, so I soon muted myself immediately afterwards. But that was really fascinating. Thanks, Mark. I do have some questions, actually. I was making some notes I was going through, and we've had a few questions come in as well. Now, you talked there about, trialing effectively some of these AI solutions. How do you do that in a way in healthcare that doesn't impact patient care? Effectively, how can you trial it and use real world patients as a test effectively?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it is it's definitely sort of one of the challenging aspects of this. And to some extent, you have to take a look at how care is actually currently delivered, right? And so the way that care is currently delivered, if you think about it, a patient presents to a clinician. That clinician, as part of a dialogue, generates a hypothesis. As a result of that hypothesis, they ask for certain tests or certain further investigation. The information comes back from those, and then they change their hypothesis or they change their direction, right? So the nature of the way that care is actually given is the clinician is always kind of trialing within the context of guidelines of care and what's best for the patients. So that's kind of a little bit of a backdrop. And then the other piece is, it doesn't actually get trialed on patients or implemented until it's gone through this very, very rigorous methodological retrospective internal and external analysis, prospective internal and external analysis without actual implementation, shadow implementations where you compare what the algorithms are recommending versus what the physicians actually did, right? And you do some postmortems on that to try and understand where and how the model is performing well or not well. And basically, it doesn't roll out until it's at a point in time where all of the clinicians agree that this additional information that's being provided by this solution actually helps them make better clinical decisions in the same way that they order a CBC at an appropriate point in time. So at no point in time is the autonomy of the clinician taken away. This is just additional information that's given to the clinician at an appropriate point in time via a mechanism that's integrated into their workflows, such that they can now make a more informed decision as to what is in the best interests of their patient and the treatment path.
Yeah, and of course, this is one of the main concerns that's often brought up when it comes to AI. It's about AI effectively replacing humans or taking away that human element. But I assume rather than replacing, what you're doing is, you're replacing to a degree, but I assume that you always have the human element in there making the key decisions. They're just using the AI to interpret the data and to do it at a faster speed.
Exactly, right. And so when we talk about AI, right, we like to talk about it as augmented intelligence, right, rather than artificial intelligence, right? And I'm not the first one to create that, right? And we talk a lot about human in the loop. There always has to be a human in the loop, what we're doing here. I mean, at the end of the day, there are things that algorithms do better than humans. And in fact, we've even been comfortable using algorithms in healthcare for decades, and they're deeply, deeply entrenched in how we deliver that care. But those algorithms are explainable, they're evidence-based, right? their track record has been demonstrated over many years of use. And so again, the intent is to treat these algorithms, hold them to the same standards. And importantly, this is another thing which we don't do with the algorithms that are already being used in healthcare, is we monitor them after they go into production. We make sure that they continue to deliver the outcomes and the value over time, because the world changes. We all thought the world was one way before March of 2020, obviously, and now it's very different. And I mean, even within that context, we had built predictive models against the first wave of COVID in March and April. And then when we had our second wave in the October-November timeframe, we noticed the model wasn't working as well. Right now, whether that's because treatment has changed, or the disease had changed, or population had changed, who knows? But you have to continuously monitor once that application goes into production. You have to continuously monitor to make sure that it is still unbiased and fair and equitable and reliable, and all of those lists, and explainable. And that's really the best that we can do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've just got time for one more quick question, I think, and I'm going to move away from the specifics of healthcare. It's a really good point I think you made early on, where you said AI is what computers can't yet do today. So what can we expect from AI in the near future?
Well, so obviously all of the focus, a lot of the focus right now is on making those models explainable, right? So one of the things that AI really, some forms of AI are extremely explainable, like all of the tree models, right? Or GAMs are wonderfully explainable. But obviously all the deep learning neural network stuff can be a little bit opaque. And there's a lot of really amazing work that's being done there to help give insight into how those models actually work and how they make their decisions. And that's enormously important, such that you don't end up with unintended consequences. The classic example here comes from Rich Caruana, actually from the 90s, right, where they were building a model to predict who should go, if someone presents with flu, who should go inpatient and who can safely be sent home as an outpatient. And they built these models, and these models were saying, well, if you have asthma, you should be sent home, you'll be fine. And everybody knew this was wrong, right? Because obviously if you have asthma and pneumonia, you need to go inpatient, you need to get a higher standard of care. And basically what the models were picking up on was the fact that patients came in, they presented with pneumonia. The first thing clinicians did was give them a higher standard of care, send them inpatient, and then they had better outcomes. And the models weren't trained on all that stuff that happened in the middle. All they were trained on was asthma correlates with better outcomes, right? And so you can have these unintended, and those unintended consequences get harder to see the more complicated the model. And so I think it's a huge area of research. It's enormously important, and I think we'll see some really interesting technologies there. The one other thing I'll throw in is federated learning. I think that's going to be a really key part of how we train models, how we validate models, and how we think of AI. So those are the near-term things, without getting into the science fiction of quantum, which will be here, right, and all those types of things.
Okay, that sounds like the perfect place for us to leave it there, Marc. So thank you very much again for your time, Marc Paradis. Now, if you want to connect with Marc, you can contact him directly through the event app, and you can ask him any more questions. I did have more questions, but we're running out of time, unfortunately. So thank you again, Marc, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, everyone. It was fantastic. Have a great day.
Okay, well, I think that brings us almost towards the end of today. But thanks for joining us, and stay tuned. We've got a few messages coming up from some of our supporters.